Title: George Washington, the man who became America's first president. He was the man who refused to be king, yet became the symbol of freedom for a new nation. Before there was a United States of America, there was just an idea. The dream of a land where liberty would stand taller than any crown. And in the center of that dream stood one man, George Washington. Born in Virginia in 1732, Washington wasn't born into wealth or royalty. He was a farmer, a soldier, and most importantly, a man of unshakable character. When the colonies rose against the mightiest empire of the world, Great Britain, Washington became the unlikely commander of an army of farmers and merchants. They lacked supplies, they lacked training, but they had something stronger. A belief that freedom was worth fighting for. Through bitter winters at Valley Forge, desperate battles and near defeat, Washington's leadership never wavered. When the revolution ended, he could have seized absolute power. The people wanted him to be king, but he refused. Instead, he chose democracy. That decision changed history forever. In 1789, Washington became the first president of the United States, setting examples that future leaders would follow. Honor, humility, and service. He built the foundation of the presidency, guided the newborn nation, and then, when he could have stayed, he stepped down willingly. His legacy is not just written in books or carved in marble, it lives in every idea of American freedom. If you believe great leadership comes from character, not crowns, hit that like button, share this story, and subscribe for more untold moments in American history. The story of freedom has many chapters, and this was just the first. Early life and background. George Washington's story begins long before the Revolution, before the fame, before the title. Father of his country. It began on February 22, 1732, in Westmoreland County, Virginia, where he was born into a modest family of landowners. His father, Augustine Washington, was a respected planter, and his mother, Mary Ball Washington, was known for her strict discipline and strong moral values. From her, young George inherited the foundation of his character, a sense of duty, integrity, and self-control that would guide him throughout his life. The Washington family owned plantations and enslaved people, as was common in Virginia's economy at the time. Yet George's early life wasn't one of luxury. When his father died suddenly in 1743, George was only 11 years old. The loss changed everything. He could not afford the elite education in England that his older half-brothers received. Instead, he learned through experience, observation, and self-discipline. Washington studied mathematics, geography, and surveying, practical skills that would later prove valuable in both war and politics. As a teenager, George developed a fascination with the vast wilderness of the Virginia frontier. At just 16, he joined a surveying expedition led by Lord Fairfax, a wealthy landowner. Those early years exploring forests and mountains taught him resilience and independence. He learned to sleep under the stars, navigate rough terrain, and handle responsibility far beyond his age. These experiences forged the self-reliance and leadership that later defined him on the battlefield. By his early 20s, Washington had built a reputation as a skilled surveyor and a young man of promise. But he wanted more. He was ambitious, proud, and hungry for respect. The colonial world of Virginia revolved around honor, and for a man of Washington's background, the military offered the best path to earn it. In 1753, as tensions rose between Britain and France over territory in North America, Washington seized his opportunity. The British governor of Virginia needed someone brave and capable to deliver a message deep into the frontier, a warning to the French to withdraw from the Ohio River Valley. Washington volunteered without hesitation. The mission was perilous. Icy rivers, hostile terrain, and potential attack at any moment. Yet he completed it successfully, earning the admiration of colonial leaders. That mission marked the beginning of Washington's rise as a soldier and statesman. He later fought in the French and Indian War, where he showed remarkable bravery, but also learned painful lessons about leadership and humility. He experienced both victory and defeat, And he came to understand that true honor wasn't just about winning, it was about perseverance and character. Behind the uniform, though, Washington remained deeply connected to his roots, his love for Virginia, his loyalty to his family, and his sense of destiny. Every hardship, from the loss of his father to the harsh frontier winters, shaped him into a man who valued hard work, discipline, and moral strength above all. By the time the colonies began to question British rule, George Washington had already built a reputation for courage, integrity, and leadership. He wasn't a man of many words, but his actions spoke volumes. People trusted him. And in a time when the colonies needed someone to lead them through uncertainty, Washington's steady presence would soon make him the natural choice. He had gone from a fatherless boy on a Virginia plantation to a respected soldier and statesman, a journey fueled by ambition, honor, and duty. And though he could not have known it then, the same values that drove him in youth would one day make him the first president of the United States, the man who turned dreams of freedom into a living nation. Military rise, the French and Indian War. Before George Washington became the legendary commander of the American Revolution, he stepped onto the world stage through a brutal conflict that shaped him more than any classroom or plantation ever could. The French and Indian War. This was Washington's true beginning as a soldier, a leader, and a man who would learn that greatness is forged not in comfort, but in crisis. By 1754, tensions between Britain and France were exploding across North America. Both empires wanted control over the rich lands of the Ohio River Valley, and the frontier became a dangerous chessboard. The British needed someone young, bold, and fearless to push into the wilderness and challenge the French. Someone willing to take risks that others hesitated to face. Washington, just 22, stepped forward. This war would test him in every way. Washington's first mission was a dangerous diplomatic journey through icy rivers, towering forests, and lands controlled by native tribes. He delivered the British demand for the French to withdraw and returned with valuable intelligence. His courage caught the attention of colonial leaders, positioning him as one of Virginia's rising stars. But what came next would be far more challenging. In 1754, Washington led a small force to confront the French at Fort Duquesne. Tension erupted, shots were fired, and suddenly the young Virginian found himself responsible for triggering a global conflict, what many historians call the true beginning of the 7 Years' War. Shortly after, he built the hastily constructed Fort Necessity, where he and his men were overwhelmed in a rain-soaked battle. Washington was forced to surrender, the only time he ever surrendered in his military career. But instead of breaking him, this early defeat transformed him. Washington studied every mistake: poor positioning, weak defenses, the dangers of rushing into battle without full information. He learned that courage alone wouldn't win wars. Strategy, patience, and preparation mattered just as much. This painful lesson would later guide him through the darkest moments of the Revolution. Though defeated, his bravery caught the attention of British commanders. They saw something in him, a spark of leadership, a calm in chaos, a man unafraid to stand firm, even when outnumbered. In 1755, Washington joined British General Edward Braddock in a major campaign to retake the frontier. What followed was one of the defining moments of his military rise. Near the Monongahela River, Braddock's army was ambushed. Musket fire rained from the trees. Soldiers fell around him and chaos exploded. Horses were shot down. Officers collapsed, and yet Washington rode through the storm, his coat pierced by bullets. 2 horses shot from under him. Witnesses said it seemed as if he couldn't be killed. He rallied survivors, organized a retreat, and prevented a complete massacre. The battle was a devastating British defeat. But Washington's name rose higher than ever. Word spread across the colonies. This was a man who did not break under fire. Over the next years, Washington commanded frontier defenses, led dangerous patrols, and managed scattered forts under brutal conditions. He learned how to move troops through wilderness, how to negotiate with native allies, and how to build discipline among inexperienced soldiers. He discovered the emotional weight of leadership, writing letters to comfort the families of fallen men, balancing the fears of settlers and learning to command respect rather than demand it. But most importantly, Washington gained two priceless qualities that would define his future: resilience, a refusal to quit, no matter the odds; wisdom, an understanding that victories are earned through patience, planning, and sacrifice. By the end of the French and Indian War, Washington had transformed from an ambitious young Virginian into a seasoned leader. He had tasted defeat, danger, and responsibility. He emerged with a reputation for unshakable courage, a man other soldiers looked to when everything seemed lost. These experiences didn't just prepare him for the revolution. They made him the commander America desperately needed, the revolutionary leader when history needed a hero. Not a perfect man, not a noble king, but a steady, unbreakable leader. George Washington stepped forward. By 1775, the American colonies were done begging Britain for fairness. The gunshots at Lexington and Concord had already turned protest into war. The Continental Congress gathered in Philadelphia, knowing they needed someone bold enough to face the world's strongest empire. There were wealthier men, more educated men, even more experienced soldiers. But only one man had the respect: presence and quiet strength, powerful enough to unite 13 divided colonies. So on June 15, 1775, Congress made a decision that would change history. George Washington was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. No salary, no promise of victory, no guarantee of survival, just duty and the courage to accept it. From the moment he took command, Washington faced chaos. His army was really a mix of farmers, fishermen, and shopkeepers armed with old muskets and almost no training. Supplies were scarce. Ammunition was low. Disease spread faster than orders. Britain's army was disciplined, well-funded, and backed by the most powerful navy on earth. But Washington had something the British didn't: the trust of his people and an unshakable belief that freedom was worth fighting for. The Siege of Boston, the first test. Washington's first major challenge was Boston, where British troops held the city. When he arrived, morale was collapsing. Soldiers were hungry, sick, and ready to give up. Washington reorganized everything: the camps, the defenses, the discipline. Slowly, the army began to look like an army. In early 1776, with cannons dragged through icy mountains by Henry Knox, Washington pulled off a stunning strategic victory. He placed artillery on Dorchester Heights, forcing the British to evacuate the city. It wasn't just a win, it was proof. Proof that America could fight. Proof that Washington could lead. But the real test was still ahead. The war turns dark, a winter of doubt. Later that year, the British hit back hard. Washington's army suffered defeat after defeat in New York. Soldiers deserted. Supplies vanished. By December 1776, the revolution was dying. Many believed independence had been a dream too big for reality. But Washington refused to let hope die. When others saw defeat, he saw one last chance. Trenton, the strike that saved a revolution. On the night of December 25, 1776, in freezing wind, icy waters, and blinding snow, Washington led his men across the Delaware River. This was not just a military move. It was a message to the world that America would not quit. At dawn, they struck the Hessian garrison in Trenton with total surprise. Victory, at last. The win electrified the colonies. Recruitment surged, faith returned. Washington had done the impossible. He turned a dying rebellion into a rising revolution. Years of hardship, and a leader who would not break. The victories were powerful, but the suffering was relentless. At Valley Forge, men froze without shoes. At Morristown, hunger clawed at every campfire. At Monmouth, heat stroke killed nearly as many as muskets. Congress doubted, officers doubted, even the public doubted. But Washington stood firm, the center of gravity that held the entire cause together. He walked among starving soldiers, sharing their fire, their cold, their pain. His presence alone restored courage. When the revolution needed hope, Washington became hope. Yorktown, the moment that changed the world, 1781. After 6 years of exhaustion, America found a chance to strike a final blow. Washington joined forces with French General Rochambeau, coordinated with Admiral de Grasse, and launched a masterful plan: surround the British at Yorktown, Virginia. For weeks, cannon fire shook the earth. British General Cornwallis held on, until he couldn't. With escape blocked and supplies gone, he surrendered on October 19, 1781. Yorktown wasn't just a victory. It was the moment the impossible became reality. The moment the colonies became a future nation. The moment Washington secured American independence. Crowds celebrated, bells rang across cities, and the world watched in disbelief. The untrained rebels had defeated the empire that ruled the oceans. And at the center of it all stood a commander who never let the flame of freedom die. A leader unlike any other. Washington didn't just win battles. He won trust. He held together an army that should have collapsed 100 times. He led a revolution not with promises, but with perseverance. And that's what made him more than a general. That's what made him a symbol. A man the new nation would soon call its first president. The reluctant president. When the guns fell silent after Yorktown and the Treaty of Paris officially recognized American independence, George Washington did something almost no victorious commander in history had ever done. He gave up power. He returned to Mount Vernon, his quiet plantation overlooking the Potomac River. After 8 grueling years of war, Washington wanted nothing more than peace, to walk among his fields, enjoy evenings by the hearth with Martha, and live the life of a simple Virginia farmer. To him, the revolution was over. His duty was done. He believed his story had reached its final chapter. But the new nation was falling apart, a young country in crisis. By the mid-1780s, the United States was struggling. The Articles of Confederation, the nation's first system of government, was weak. States fought one another over trade. Foreign nations refused to take America seriously. The economy collapsed. Armed rebellions broke out. Like Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts, leaders across the states looked around and realized something terrifying. The revolution had been won, but the country was failing. And yet, there was one man every American trusted. One man who could unify the country simply by standing in the room. George Washington. Called once more. In 1787, Washington was reluctantly persuaded to attend the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. When he entered the room, the delegates unanimously chose him to preside over the debates, a sign that even in retirement, his presence commanded unparalleled respect. When the new Constitution was approved, the next step was clear. The nation needed a president. Not a king, not a ruler, but a steady, honorable figure to guide the fragile government into stability. And once again, the people turned to Washington. The unanimous choice, twice. In 1789, every single elector voted for George Washington to become the first president of the United States. No president has ever matched that level of unanimous support, except George Washington himself, when he was re-elected in 1793. He didn't want power. He didn't seek glory. In fact, he felt anxiety and doubt. He feared the job was too heavy, the expectations too high. But as always, Washington answered the nation's call. When he took the oath of office in New York City, he wasn't just becoming a president. He was shaping the future of democracy itself. And because there was no blueprint for the job, Washington had to invent what a president should be, setting the precedents, a blueprint for leadership. When he created the first presidential cabinet, Washington understood he couldn't run the government alone, so he formed a team of trusted advisors, the first cabinet. Thomas Jefferson, Secretary of State; Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of the Treasury; Henry Knox, Secretary of War; Edmund Randolph, Attorney General. These men often disagreed loudly, but Washington used their perspectives to shape balanced decisions. Today, every president follows this model. 2. He established a neutral foreign policy. Europe was engulfed in conflict, especially between Britain and France. Both demanded American support, but Washington knew the newborn nation was too weak for another war. His solution? Neutrality. He issued the Proclamation of Neutrality in 1793, declaring the U.S. would not take sides. It was a daring decision that protected the nation during its most vulnerable years and defined American foreign policy for generations. 3. He set the two-term tradition. Perhaps Washington's most powerful precedent came not from what he did, but what he refused to do. When his second term ended in 1797, many begged him to remain in power. Some even pushed the idea of making him president for life. But Washington knew the dangers of concentrated power. America had just escaped monarchy. It couldn't risk slipping back into it. So he stepped down after 2 terms, proving that leadership is service, not ownership. This became a sacred American tradition until it was written into law with the 22nd Amendment. The president who chose restraint. Washington's genius wasn't in dramatic speeches or charisma, it was in his restraint. He avoided political factions, rejected personal power, allowed Congress to function independently, respected the limits of the Constitution, acted not for himself but for the nation. His leadership taught America something essential. A strong leader does not cling to power. He gives the nation the tools to thrive without him. The farewell. In 1796, Washington delivered a farewell address that remains one of the most important speeches in American history. He warned against political parties, foreign entanglements, and regional divisions, issues that continue to shape politics today. When he finally left office, he didn't ask for praise. He simply returned to Mount Vernon, hoping the nation he helped create would endure. And it did, because of the foundations he laid. George Washington wasn't just the first president. He was the model of what a president should be, humble, principled, and guided by duty, not ambition. Washington's legacy. The story of George Washington doesn't end with his presidency. It ends with the legacy he carved into the soul of a nation. And if the Revolution built America's freedom, Washington's example built America's identity. After 2 terms as president, he stepped down peacefully in 1797, refusing the temptation of power. This single decision did more to shape the United States than many battles or laws. At a time when the world was filled with kings, emperors, and dictators, Washington made a radical choice. He chose democracy over dominance, the man who refused a crown. During and after the Revolution, many people viewed Washington as the perfect candidate to become a monarch. They admired him, trusted him, and believed only he could hold the young nation together. Some even suggested crowning him king, but Washington rejected the idea every time. He understood that America could not preach liberty while embracing monarchy. "A king?" he once responded. "No, that is not what we fought for." This refusal is what separated him from powerful men throughout history. Washington didn't cling to authority, he surrendered it. Twice. First when he resigned as commander of the Continental Army, then again when he voluntarily left the presidency. This is why his legacy towers above most leaders. He proved that true power is the ability to walk away from it, a farewell that echoes through time. Before leaving public life, Washington delivered his famous farewell address in 1796, a message not just to his generation, but to every generation after. And even today, the warnings he gave continue to feel prophetic. 1. Beware of political parties. Washington feared that parties would turn Americans against one another, creating division, hostility, and loyalty to groups instead of the nation. He was right. His warning still reflects the challenges the United States faces today. 2. Avoid permanent foreign alliances. Washington believed the U.S. should stay independent in its decisions and avoid being dragged into other nations' conflicts. Neutrality, he argued, would protect America's freedom and stability. 3. Protect national unity. To Washington, unity was the backbone of survival. A divided America, he warned, would be vulnerable to outside forces and internal chaos. His farewell wasn't a victory speech. It was a blueprint for a nation still learning to walk. The final years, when Washington retired again to Mount Vernon, he hoped for quiet days, tending crops and managing his estate. But he remained a national figure, a symbol of strength, honesty, and independence. Even in retirement, His presence influenced politics. Leaders wrote to him seeking advice. Citizens visited to see the man who had shaped their nation. Foreigners traveled just to catch a glimpse of him. But Washington's health did not remain strong. In December 1799, after riding through freezing rain to inspect his property, he developed a severe throat infection. His condition worsened rapidly. On December 14, 1799, surrounded by loved ones, George Washington passed away. His final words reflected his lifelong character. "It is well." The news shocked the entire country. Churches rang bells, cities held memorial services, citizens cried openly in the streets. The nation mourned not just a leader, but a father. The man who had guided them from rebellion to independence, from chaos to stability. Even the British, America's former enemy, paid tribute. The world recognized the passing of an extraordinary figure, the leader who defined a nation. Washington's legacy can't be measured in monuments or currency. It lives in the principles that hold American democracy together. He defined leadership at its highest level: service over ambition, honor over power, unity over division, duty over personal gain. He wasn't perfect. He was human, flawed, evolving. But his example set a standard that shaped every president who followed. Washington didn't just lead a revolution. He led by character. He didn't just win independence. He kept the nation from collapsing. He didn't just take office. He built the office. And he didn't just write history. He became the measure of leadership in a democratic world. Today, centuries later, Americans still look to George Washington as the model of what a president should be. Calm in crisis, humble in victory, and guided by values larger than himself. His story remains a reminder that the greatest leaders are not the ones who gather power, but the ones who rise above it. He built no empire, sought no crown, yet his name became the cornerstone of a free world. George Washington didn't shape America by ruling it. He shaped it by refusing to. His leadership didn't come from power, but from principle. His victories were not just on the battlefield, but in the choices he made when no one could command him. And long after the battles ended, long after he stepped away from office, his legacy continued to guide a nation, finding its place in the world. He showed that greatness isn't about dominance. It's about discipline, that the strongest leaders are not those who hold power the longest, but those who use it wisely, and then let it go. Washington may have lived in the 18th century, but his example echoes through every generation, reminding us what leadership, sacrifice, and true patriotism look like. As we close this chapter, remember this: America's first president wasn't born a legend. He became one through choices rooted in courage and character. And that is why his story still matters today. If this story inspired you, make sure you hit like, share this video with others who love history, and subscribe for more untold stories from the past. Your support helps bring these powerful moments back to life.